Namaste, Dandavat Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, the Status Quo. Chapter 26, Text 7. Ad asya samshrutir bandha paratantrayam chatatkritam bhavatyakar ishasya sakshino nirvratatmana. Material consciousness is the cause of one's conditional life, in which conditions are enforced upon the living entity by the material energy. Although the spirit soul does not do anything and is transcendental to such activities, he is thus affected by conditional life. Purport. The Mayavadi philosopher, who does not differentiate between the supreme spirit and the individual spirit, says that the conditional existence of a living entity is his lila, or pastime. But the word pastime implies employment in the activities of the Lord. The Mayavadis misuse the word and say that even if the living entity has become a stool-eating hog, he is also enjoying his pastimes. This is a most dangerous interpretation. Actually, the Supreme Lord is the leader and maintainer of all living entities. His pastimes are transcendental to any material activity. Such pastimes of the Lord cannot be dragged to the level of the conditional activities of living entities. In conditional life, the living entity actually remains as if a captive in the hands of material energy. Whatever the material energy dictates, the conditioned soul does. He has no responsibility. He is simply the witness of the action, but he is forced to act in that way due to his energy. He's simply the witness of the action, but he is forced to act in that way due to his offense in his eternal relationship with Krishna. Lord Krishna therefore says in Bhagavad Gita that Maya, his material energy, is so forceful that it is insurmountable. But if a living entity simply understands that his constitutional position is to serve Krishna, and he tries to act on this principle, then however conditioned he may be, the influence of Maya immediately vanishes. This is clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita 7th chapter. Krishna takes charge of anyone who surrenders to him in helplessness, and thus the influence of Maya or conditional life is removed. The spirit soul is actually Satchidananda, eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. Under the clutches of Maya, however, he suffers from continued birth, death, disease, and old age. One has to be serious to cure this condition of material existence and transfer himself to Krishna consciousness, for thus his long suffering may be mitigated without difficulty. In summary, the suffering of the conditioned soul is due to his attachment to material nature. This attachment should be thus transferred from matter to Krishna. Text 8. Karya karana kartritve karanam prakritim vidu bhoktritve shuka dukanam purusham prakrite param. The cause of the conditioned soul's material body and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that when the Lord descends to this material world, he comes as a person by his own energy, Atma Maya. He is not forced by any superior energy. He comes by his own will, and this can be called his pastime or lila. But here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change this conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the entity enjoys his pastimes, once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his pastimes by accepting the body of a hog. This theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, this interpretation is most misleading. When there is enforced acceptance for suffering, it is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entities' acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. Text 9. Divahutir uvacha prakrite purushasyapi lakshanam purushottama bruhi karana yor asya sadasachcha yad atmakam. Devahuti said, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, kindly explain the characteristics of the Supreme Person and his energies, for both of these are the causes of this manifest and unmanifest creation. Purport. Prakriti, or material nature, is connected with both the Supreme Lord and the living entities, just as a woman is connected with her husband as a wife and with her children as a mother. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he impregnates Mother Nature with children, living entities, and therefore all species of living entities become manifest. The relationship of all living entities with material nature has been explained. Now an understanding of the relationship between material nature and the Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti. The product of that relationship is stated to be the manifest and unmanifest material world. The manifest material world is subtle Mahatattva, and from that Mahatattva, the material manifestation has emerged. In the Vedic literatures, it is said that by the glance of the Supreme Lord, the total material energy is impregnated, and that everything is born of material energy. And then everything is born of material energy. It is also confirmed in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that under his glance, adhyakshena, under his direction and by his will, nature is working. It is not that nature works blindly. After understanding the position of the conditioned souls in relation to material nature, Devahuti wanted to know how nature works under the direction of the Lord and what the relationship is between the material nature and the Lord. And in other words, she wanted to learn the characteristics of the Supreme Lord in relation to the material nature. The relationship of the living entities with matter and that of the Supreme Lord with matter are certainly not on the same level, although the Mayavadis may interpret it that way. When it is said that the living entities are bewildered, the Mayavad philosophers ascribe this bewilderment to the Supreme Lord, but that is not applicable. The Lord is never bewildered. That is the difference between personalists and impersonalists. Devahuti is not unintelligent. She has enough intelligence to understand that the living entities are not on the same level as the Supreme Lord. Because the living entities are infinitesimal, they become bewildered or conditioned by material nature. But this does not mean that the Supreme Lord is also conditioned or bewildered. The difference between the conditioned soul and the Lord is that the Lord is the Lord, the master of material nature, and he is therefore not subject to its control. He is controlled neither by spiritual nature nor material nature. He is the supreme controller himself, and he cannot be compared to the ordinary living entities who are controlled by the laws of material nature. Two words are used in this verse, Sat and Asat. The cosmic manifestation is Asat, it does not exist, but the material energy of the Supreme Lord is Sat, or ever existing. Material nature is ever existing in its subtle form as the energy of the Lord, but it sometimes manifests this non-existent or temporarily existent nature, the cosmos. An analogy may be made with the father and mother. The mother and the father exist, but sometimes the mother begets children. Similarly, the cosmic manifestation, which comes from the unmanifest material nature of the Supreme Lord, sometimes appears and again disappears. But the material nature is ever existing, and the Lord is the supreme cause for both the subtle and gross manifestations of this material world. Text 10. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Yatat Trigunam Avyaktam Nityam Sad Asad Atmakam Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur Avishesham Visheshavat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state and is called pradhana or pradhan. It is called prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence. Purport. The Lord points out material nature in its subtle stage, which is called pradhan. He analyzes this pradhan. The explanation of pradhan and prakriti is that pradhan is the subtle, undifferentiated sum total of all the material elements. Although they are undifferentiated, one can understand that the total material elements are contained therein. When the total material elements are unmanifested by the interaction of the three modes of material nature, the manifestation is called prakriti. Impersonalists say that Brahman is without variegatedness and without differentiation. One may say that because in Brahman there is no existence of the material modes, one may say that pradhana is the Brahman stage, but actually the Brahman stage is not pradhana. Pradhan is distinct from Brahman because in Brahman there is no existence of the material modes of nature. One may argue that Mahatattva is also different from pradhan because in the Mahatattva there are manifestations. The actual explanation of pradhan, however, is given here. When the cause and effect are not clearly manifested, avyakta, the reaction of the total elements does not take place. And that stage of material nature is called pradhan. Pradhan is not the time element because in the time element there are actions and reactions, creation and annihilation. Nor is it the jiva or marginal potency of the living entities or designated conditioned living entities, because the designations of the living entities are not eternal. One adjective used in this connection is nitya, which indicates eternality. Therefore, the condition of material nature immediately previous to its manifestation is called pradhan. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 11 on Wednesday. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada Srila Guru Maharaj Srila Gurudev Srila Acharya Dev Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupa Nuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Our glories to the assembled devotees. Our glories to the worldwide devotees. Sama Bhakti Vedavanda Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Nishrangapalli Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai. Ganga Mai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Giri Govardhan, Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai, Sham Kund, Radha Kund Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi, Bhakti Devi, Vrinda Devi Ki Jai, Jai, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Princeton Bhakti Vedanta Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Hari. Anava Pranams, Hare Krishna.